Waves crash on an old battleship, just returning from war. Jovial music, food, and laughter fills the air as the crewmen are ready to return home to Yanqui. The ship carries much more than gold, however.
Hello class, I am here to announce the end of my tenure as your teacher. Instead, I will be handing over the reins to the crazy historian. He will continue to give you regular lectures about the amazing world of History 2.0. As an added bonus, that means that today you will get 2 episodes. One on this channel, and if you follow the link at the end, one on his channel. I hope you enjoy, and the crazy historian, take it away.
Greetings, class! Today we'll be continuing our discussion of Time Antal during the Ancient Era. Now, I know you might be familiar with Time Antal nowadays, but back in the Ancient Era, things were much different. Last time, your substitute taught you about the South, and today we will cover the North. The North consisted of 4 major nations. First, the Yanqui. They were originally a kingdom, but eventually over time became essentially a coalition of mostly independent states, even having different religious beliefs between states. The farther away from the capital, the more independent the states were. Due to the lack of control from the central government, the coastal territories were dominated economically and militarily by the Ost for a majority of the Sigetikhet hegemony. The Yanqui were in a constant state of struggle against the nomadic tribes, consistently resisting raids and invasions. The Yanqui were making great headway against the nomads though, and had already vassalized many of the tribes near them. Next to them was one of their good allies, the Firulan. The Firulan were a more traditional coalition of states, being made up of 22 city-states who had only just stopped fighting each other. Due to this arrangement, Firulan had a unique government structure, acting more as a federation than a single nation. As said before, they were good allies with the Yanqui, having similar religions and being good trade partners. They were lucky enough to not be as affected by the Ost raids, due to their distance and lack of valuable minerals, which the Ost couldn't get elsewhere. Moving north, there is a nation by the name of the Minqali. They had an archaic form of democracy, electing a figure similar to a president every few years. This northern nation was the second most dominant nation in all of Time Antal, having a major navy and influence in the north, essentially being the Ost of the north. There is evidence, in fact, that it was Minqali settlers who initially founded the Ost, which is why the 2 nations both had aptitudes for the navy and mostly kept good relations, though this connection is still hotly debated by historians. Finally, we have the state of the Yanqui. This nation used to be a great nation known to the locals as the Fire Nation. Since this nation existed before the prevalence of written records in the region, not much is known about it. However, we do know that there was a great war between the Fire Nation and the Minqali, leading to the massive expansion into the so-called Fire Isles and the collapse of the Fire Nation. The state of Yanqui was established as a puppet of the Minqali, and at the beginning of this era was still under the dominance of the Minqali. Unlike many of the northern nations, the Yanqui were subjected to major raids by the Ost, leading to their major participation in their fall. After the sacking of the Ost Island, a Yanqui battleship, known as the Nupiai, returned to Yanqui. However, it carried a deadly virus, the Ost mark. Scientific research has determined that the virus was originally carried by some sort of rat, though it is unknown how the members of the crew got infected. Once the virus eventually landed on the Yanqui mainland, it began spreading all throughout the nation. The king of Yanqui at this time was incredibly ineffective, and mainly ignored the problem until it was too late. In a vain attempt to hide his weakness, the king declared the creation of a quarantine area around the southern coast to prevent the spread of the virus, which would have been effective had it not already spread through almost the entire nation at that point. The quarantine areas remained without contact from the government for the entire duration of the infection, which was around 55 years. Leading to the cities and towns within the quarantine zone to establish their own independent policies and relationships without permission from the crown. After the infection had mostly ended and the quarantine zone was repealed, the Yanqui military was far too weak to re-establish control of the independent city-states. Meanwhile, in the north, the Minqali weren't faring much better. For over 200 years, the Minqali dominated the north and managed to keep a stable government. It seemed like they would continue to grow in strength, but in 1778, over 3 dozen earthquakes struck the Minqali Kimnaskit territory, followed by at least 3 separate tsunamis. These natural disasters destroyed many key cities on Kimnaskit, completely decimating the populace and annihilating Minkali's stationed navy. But no, it doesn't just stop there. In midsummer, a typhoon ripped through the entire country, and the subsequent flooding and destruction of crops led to a famine. The events of this year and the following famine led to the deaths of over 1/3 of the population. In the Minkali, this year is forever remembered as the Year of Despair. After this year, Firulin and Yunsui tasted blood in the water. Firulin, after a power grab by the two major city-states, had united into a kingdom under rulership of King Saimata. The nation then completed its consolidation of the south of the peninsula. After this, the king looked towards the islands to his south to continue growing the nation's influence and trade. Unfortunately, almost all of the tribes on the island were under the direct or indirect influence of the Minkali. Yunsui, on the other hand, had always craved independence and had further goals to follow in the footsteps of the former Fire Nation by taking control over the rest of Kimnaskit. The two nations formed a secret alliance of convenience against the Minkali. In early 1777 PH, a diplomatic incident between the Firulin and Minkali led to the outbreak of war. This war would be known as the Great North Sea War. They began a joint invasion of the Minkali. The Minkali's army and navy were a shell of its former self, and its cities were weak and undefended. The war only lasted for 4 years, ending with a legendary invasion of the Minkali capital of Amhat by the Firulin general of Kazape. The peace deal would lead to the Firulin obtaining major influence over the southern Kinmaskit states, the Yunsui getting independence, and the Yunsui seizing major territories from the Minkali. After the devastating Year of Despair and the North Sea War, Minkali was unbelievably unstable and weak. They had gone from the second most powerful nation in the known world to being defeated by two upstart nations, which used to be under its thumb. In the first election after the war, the Lai-e-Kaman faction came into power, and over the next few years started to turn the country into a dictatorship, postponing elections, seizing private power, and silencing other factions. The new ruler Hakanaiya Ekmikla began the process of rebuilding Minkali for war. Both Yunsui and Minkali knew a war was coming. Both wanted it, and both were ready for it. The reasons for Minkali eagerness for war is obvious, but the Yunsui wanted to gain the entire island and to reinstate their new conquests, and so, war it was. Firulin was unable to assist in the war due to the Ostmark ravaging their lands and being plunged into a bloody civil war. Eventually, after a few small skirmishes, all-out war was declared, and the Second Minkali Fire War began. Initially, the war seemed up in the air, with minor skirmishes near the border seeming inconclusive. But in the first major battle, the Yunsui forces were surprised near Lantakek Hill and were crushed by the Minkali. After many long years of campaigning, the Yunsui would be defeated by the Minkali presidency. In the peace, the Minkali seized back much of their territory they lost from the Yunsui, but not all of it, due to the stubbornness from the Yunsui diplomats. Additionally, the Yunsui would remain independent. However, that's where we leave the Kimnaskit Islands for now. As mentioned before, the Firulin were busy with a massive civil war. After the Ostmark hit the Yunsui, it traveled over to the mainland in Firulin. Unfortunately, the king contracted the disease and eventually succumbed to it, leaving his many sons to fight for the crown. The period of claimants within Firulin would end when Saimata's third son, Petzape the Bloody, was able to eliminate all of his rival claimants. Petzape, after securing control over all of Firulin, looked towards the Isles with hate, blaming the people of the archipelago for his father's death.
The islands of Japeru stand as an embarrassment to the entire civilized world. Their lands are filled with nothing but plague-ridden savages whose diseases kill our beloved when we befriend them. Continued contact with these savages only proves that the ideas of the former Pangin kings to be true. We must protect ourselves from the dirty savages of the outside.
When this rhetoric is reviewed by historians nowadays, they often point out that Firulin had only managed to stave off the worst of the plague due to Yunsui's assistance, as well as Yunsui's prior experience with the disease. Moreover, the death toll would have been far higher if the Firulin had more earlier adopted the hatred that Petzape had so confidently espoused. Finally, for this lecture, we will take a look at the Yanqui, who have been fairly disconnected within regional politics. Why is this? Well, though the Yanqui started out in this era great, subjugating nearby tribes and having a period of economic boom, the Yanqui were not long for this world. The Yanqui would slowly decline and grow decadent from decades of peace and prosperity. With the central government beginning to fail to project its authority over the vast Yanqui Confederacy, the local commanderies grew increasingly independent, with most of the outer commanderies, particularly in the east, becoming de facto independent, undermining the Yanquis' defenses along their northern frontier. The northern barbarians, known as the Merkit tribes, took this opportunity to invade. They quickly swept across much of the northern plains, conquering cities or razing them to the ground. They also inspired the vassal tribes of the Yanqui to rise up as well, allowing for a massive expansion in a short amount of time. The Yanqui capital of Zhongdu came under serious threat of being encircled. The Yanqui would defend their capital to the last man, as the Merkit would slowly surround it. After a brutal 8 months, the capital would finally fall, with the remaining loyalist commanderies in an act of spite declaring the dissolution of the Yanqui Confederacy. In response, the Merkit declared the creation of the Mu dynasty. Despite this massive victory, the Mu would soon struggle greatly in controlling the large realm they had acquired, with many of the Yanqui city-states under their control breaking away or being usurped by rival Merkit tribes, leading to the region to be fractured into various states for decades to come. With that, this is how we leave Taimantal after this episode. Remember to check out my channel, The Crazy Historian, to see another video on History 2, which should be up right now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, like, comment, and subscribe to both Possible History and to me. For more content like this, I have a few great videos up already, and I will continue to make more videos like this soon. Stay crazy!